Ernest Oppenheimer arrived in South Africa in 1902. He was a young German immigrant. He came to Kimberley, the heart of the diamond rush. The air buzzed with dreams of instant riches. Dust and desperation filled the mining town. Fortunes were made and lost quickly. Ernest was not a digger of dirt. He was an observer, a learner. He came as a diamond buyer for a London firm. He possessed a sharp mind and an even sharper ambition. He saw beyond the glitter of individual stones. He saw the structure of power. Kimberley was a raw, chaotic place. It was dominated by the giant De Beers Consolidated Mines. Cecil Rhodes had built this colossus. Ernest watched De Beers closely. He learned how it controlled the diamond trade. He saw how it dictated terms to smaller players. He understood the immense power of monopoly. He absorbed the brutal lessons of capitalism on the frontier. For years, he meticulously sorted and valued diamonds. He built connections. He gained an intimate knowledge of the industry's underbelly. This was his crucible. Ernest was not content to remain a mere employee. He was driven by a vision far larger than his modest beginnings. He saw the potential for an empire built on Africa's mineral wealth. He recognized that true power lay not just in trading commodities, but in controlling their source. He began to dream of challenging the established order. He envisioned a corporation that could rival and perhaps even surpass De Beers. This was not just about personal wealth. It was about constructing an edifice of power that would last for generations. His early years in South Africa were formative. They shaped his understanding of finance, industry, and control. He saw how capital, ruthlessly applied, could transform landscapes and lives. He witnessed firsthand the vast profits extracted from the earth. He also saw the human cost, though this rarely featured in his calculations. The seeds of a financial dynasty were sown in the diamond-laden soil of Kimberley. Ernest Oppenheimer was preparing to make his mark, a mark that would forever change South Africa and the global mining industry. He was patient, he was learning. The discovery of vast gold reefs on the Witwatersrand drew Ernest Oppenheimer's gaze. While diamonds were his entry point, gold represented an even greater opportunity. The scale was immense. The potential profits were staggering. He understood that exploiting these deep-level gold mines required enormous capital. It needed more than any single individual could muster. He began to look for powerful backers. He needed international finance to realize his ambitions. This was a new frontier for him, moving from the closed world of diamonds to the more complex finance of gold. In 1917, a pivotal year, Ernest Oppenheimer founded the Anglo-American Corporation of South Africa. The name itself was a stroke of strategic genius. Anglo signified British capital and connections. American pointed to the crucial financial backing he secured from J.P. Morgan and Company in the United States. This was a powerful statement. It signaled a new player backed by formidable international finance, ready to take on the established mining houses. The world was at war, but Oppenheimer was building an economic empire. He saw opportunity in global shifts. Anglo-Americans' initial focus was the development of the Far East Rand goldfields. These were challenging to exploit, requiring new technologies and massive investment. Oppenheimer was willing to take these risks. He aimed to build a mining house that was modern, efficient, and above all, highly profitable. Anglo-American was not just another mining company. It was conceived as the cornerstone of a future empire. It was designed to be a vehicle for expansion and diversification. It was built to last and to control. The backing from J.P. Morgan provided more than just money. It gave Anglo-American credibility and international leverage. This financial muscle would prove crucial in Oppenheimer's later battles, particularly his audacious bid to gain control of De Beers. Anglo-American became the central pillar of the Oppenheimer empire. From this base, Ernest would extend his influence across industries and continents. The founding of this corporation was not merely a business venture. It was an act of empire building, carefully planned and executed with precision. This entity would grow to dominate South Africa's economy. Ernest Oppenheimer never lost sight of the diamond industry. It was his first love, his area of deep expertise. He believed that true control over diamonds meant controlling De Beers Consolidated Mines. De Beers, founded by Cecil Rhodes, held a near monopoly on diamond production. Taking it over was an audacious goal. Many thought it impossible. But Ernest was a master strategist. He knew that direct confrontation would likely fail. He opted for a more patient, insidious approach. He began to acquire De Beers shares quietly, steadily. His Anglo-American corporation became the vehicle for this creeping acquisition. Year by year, Anglo increased its shareholding in De Beers. Ernest maneuvered skillfully within the complex world of mining finance. He used his growing influence to secure a seat on the De Beers board in 1926. This was a critical step. It placed him inside the fortress he intended to conquer. From this position, he could observe, influence, and wait for the opportune moment. He understood the rhythms of the market and the psychology of his rivals. The moment arrived in 1929. Ernest Oppenheimer was elected chairman of De Beers. He had effectively achieved a reverse takeover. Anglo-American, the company he founded, now controlled the diamond giant. He immediately set about reorganizing the global diamond trade. He strengthened the single-channel marketing system through the Central Selling Organization, also known as the Syndicate. This London-based entity would control the flow of rough diamonds from virtually all global producers. It was a mechanism for absolute market domination. The CSO's power was unprecedented. It dictated supply, stabilized prices, and ensured enormous profits for De Beers. It created an artificial scarcity that kept diamond values high. This control was famously reinforced by the A Diamond is Forever marketing campaign launched in the 1940s. This campaign embedded diamonds into the public consciousness as symbols of love and permanence. Ernest Oppenheimer had not just consolidated a company, he had consolidated an entire global industry, shaping desire and dictating value for decades to come. The grip was complete. With gold and diamonds firmly under control, the Oppenheimer empire began to spread its tentacles. Diversification was the strategy. It was about mitigating risk. It was also about consolidating power across the entire South African economy. Ernest, and later his son Harry, understood that true economic dominance came from controlling multiple interconnected sectors. They moved methodically, they identified key industries, they invested strategically. The empire grew sector by sector, becoming an inescapable part of the nation's fabric. Anglo-American moved aggressively into other mining ventures. Coal became a major focus, essential for powering South Africa's industrial growth and for export. Platinum group metals, vital for industrial applications, were another key area. Copper mines were acquired and developed. The empire sought control over a vast array of strategic resources. Each new acquisition strengthened the core. Each new venture provided profits that could be reinvested, fueling further expansion. The synergy between these operations was carefully managed. But the expansion did not stop at mining. The Oppenheimers pushed into heavy industry, manufacturing, and engineering. They invested in timber and paper production through companies like Mondi. They ventured into agriculture and food processing. Financial services became a crucial pillar with interests in banking and insurance. Companies like First National Bank and Southern Life became linked to the empire. This created a complex, interlocking corporate structure. One part of the empire often supplied or financed another. The term "landlords," once used to describe the early gold magnates, seemed inadequate for the Oppenheimers. Their influence was far more pervasive. They were creating a modern corporate state within the state. Their companies dominated the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Their decisions impacted national economic policy. The lines between their corporate interests and the national interest often blurred. This vast, interconnected web of companies ensured that the Oppenheimer influence was felt in nearly every aspect of South African life. It was a quiet corporate conquest. Section 5, The Janus Face, Harry Oppenheimer's Liberalism and Business. When Harry Oppenheimer inherited the empire from his father Ernest in 1957, he cultivated a different public image. He presented himself as a man of liberal values. He was urbane, educated at Oxford, and a patron of the arts. He spoke out against the brutalities of apartheid. He argued for a more enlightened approach. He famously funded the Progressive Party, a small opposition party that advocated for qualified franchise for black South Africans. This projected an image of a benevolent capitalist, a reformer working from within the system. This public liberalism, however, stood in stark contrast to the realities of his business empire. Anglo-American, under Harry's leadership, remained a primary beneficiary of the apartheid system. The vast profits from gold and diamond mines were built on the back of cheap, exploited black labor. The migrant labor system, a cornerstone of apartheid, supplied the mines with a constant stream of disenfranchised workers. These workers were housed in grim, single-sex hostels. They were denied basic rights and paid pitiful wages. This was the engine room of the Oppenheimer fortune. The contradiction was glaring. While Harry Oppenheimer spoke of reform in parliamentary debates and international forums, his companies enforced the harsh realities of apartheid on the ground. Mine security often worked closely with state police. Strikes were brutally suppressed. The pass laws, which controlled the movement of black South Africans, were essential for maintaining the migrant labor pool. Anglo-American did not create apartheid, but it adapted to it with remarkable ease. It profited immensely from its structures of oppression. This was the uncomfortable truth behind the liberal facade. Harry Oppenheimer's position was a carefully constructed paradox. He was, perhaps, a paternalistic figure in his own mind. He believed that economic growth, driven by his companies, would eventually lead to positive social change. Critics, however, saw this as a convenient justification. They argued that his liberalism was a calculated performance. It provided a veneer of respectability while the core business continued to extract wealth under an inhuman system. The empire thrived, and the stark division between its public pronouncements and its operational realities defined Harry's tenure. Section 6. Apartheid's Shadow. Labor and Exploitation. The Oppenheimer empire was deeply intertwined with the apartheid state. It was not merely a passive beneficiary. Its operations actively relied on and reinforced apartheid's structures of control and exploitation. The mining industry, the heart of the empire, was particularly dependent on discriminatory laws. These laws ensured a plentiful supply of cheap black labor. They suppressed unionization. They maintained a racial hierarchy that benefited mine owners immensely. This was the bedrock upon which Anglo-Americans' profits were built. The migrant labor system was central to this exploitation. Men were recruited from rural homelands and neighboring countries. They were forced to leave their families behind for months, even years. They lived in overcrowded, squalid compounds. These compounds were often sites of violence and disease. Workers endured dangerous conditions underground for wages that barely sustained them. The pass system criminalized their movement, tying them to specific employers and areas. This system was designed to dehumanize and control, ensuring a docile and disposable workforce. Incidents of brutal suppression of labor unrest were not uncommon. The Carltonville massacre in September 1973 at Anglo-American's Western Deep Levels mine was a stark example. 11 striking black miners were shot dead by police. Many more were injured. The strike was over wages and working conditions. Anglo-American's management condemned the violence, but largely defended the actions of the police. For many, this event exposed the brutal reality beneath the corporation's carefully polished image. It showed how far the system would go to protect its profits. The Carltonville incident was not isolated. Throughout the apartheid era, Anglo-American and other mining houses faced numerous strikes and protests. These were often met with dismissals, arrests, and violence. The company line often emphasized the need for law and order. It framed worker demands as unreasonable or politically motivated. The structural violence inherent in the system was rarely acknowledged by those at the top. The empire's growth and apartheid's oppressive labor practices were two sides of the same coin. One could not exist without the other. Section 7. Beyond Borders, the Empire's Global Reach. As international pressure against apartheid mounted, the Oppenheimer Empire began to look outwards. Diversifying globally was not just a business strategy, it was a way to secure the family's fortune against political instability in South Africa. It was a method to sidestep sanctions. It was a way to ensure the empire's longevity, regardless of the political winds at home. Harry Oppenheimer was astute. He understood the need to build a fortress of assets beyond South Africa's borders. This was a quiet, deliberate expansion. The primary vehicle for this international expansion was Minorco, the Minerals and Resources Corporation. It was strategically based in Luxembourg, a jurisdiction known for its favorable tax laws and corporate secrecy. Minorco became a holding company for a vast array of international assets. It allowed Anglo-American to invest globally, often obscuring the South African origins of the capital. This structure provided a shield against sanctions and political scrutiny. It was a sophisticated financial architecture designed for a complex world. Minorco and other Oppenheimer-linked entities made significant investments across the globe. They acquired interests in mining operations in North and South America. They invested in industrial concerns in Europe. They expanded into resource projects in Australia. The portfolio was diverse, spanning different commodities and different continents. This global spread reduced reliance on any single country or commodity. It was classic risk management executed on a grand scale. The empire was becoming truly international, its roots still in South Africa, but its branches reaching far. Despite the increasingly complex international structure, control remained firmly with the Oppenheimer family and their close associates. The intricate web of cross-shareholdings and personal connections ensured that strategic decisions flowed from the center. The empire was adept at using offshore havens and complex corporate structures. This made it difficult to trace the full extent of its holdings and influence. The global expansion was not just about acquiring assets, it was about building a resilient, adaptable, and somewhat opaque financial network that could weather any storm. Section 8. Whispers of Power, Influence in Politics and Economy. The Oppenheimer Empire wielded immense economic power within South Africa. For decades, Anglo-American and De Beers, along with their myriad subsidiaries, dominated the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. At their peak, Oppenheimer-controlled companies accounted for a huge percentage of the market's total capitalization. This economic weight translated directly into political influence. Their decisions on investment, employment, and expansion had national consequences. They were too big to ignore. They were, in many ways, the South African economy. This economic dominance naturally led to close ties with political leaders. Both before and during the apartheid era, the Oppenheimers cultivated relationships with those in power. They funded political parties, including, as mentioned, the Liberal Progressive Party. But they also maintained pragmatic relations with the ruling National Party when necessary. Access to policymakers was crucial for protecting their vast interests. The Brenthurst Group, a think tank established by the Oppenheimers, became an influential forum for discussing economic and political strategy, often shaping policy debates. The sheer scale of their influence led to persistent talk of a shadow government. While perhaps an exaggeration, it captured a certain truth. The Oppenheimers could, and often did, exert considerable pressure on government policy. Their views on taxation, labor laws, and economic strategy carried enormous weight. The lines between corporate lobbying and undue influence were often blurred. It was said that what was good for Anglo-American was good for South Africa, a statement that revealed the depth of their integration into the state's fabric. During South Africa's transition to democracy in the early 1990s, the Oppenheimer Empire played a crucial, if sometimes controversial, role. Harry Oppenheimer and his executives engaged with Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress. They sought to ensure that their economic interests would be protected in a post-apartheid South Africa. The economic negotiations during this period were critical. They helped shape the new nation's economic framework, ensuring a continuity that favored established capital. The empire adapted once again to a changing political landscape, safeguarding its power. Section 9. The enduring question, the Oppenheimer legacy today. The early 21st century saw significant shifts in the Oppenheimer Empire's structure. In 2011, the Oppenheimer family announced the sale of their remaining 40% stake in De Beers to Anglo-American. This marked the end of more than 80 years of direct family control over the diamond giant. Later, the family also divested much of its direct holding in Anglo-American itself. For some, this signaled the end of an era, the dismantling of the great empire Ernest Oppenheimer had built. But the story is more complex than that. While direct control of these two flagship corporations may have changed, the Oppenheimer family's wealth and influence endure. They manage their vast fortune through private investment vehicles like Oppenheimer Generations. They are significant players in private equity and venture capital across Africa and beyond. Their philanthropic efforts, through entities like the Brenthurst Foundation, continue to shape policy debates and development initiatives on the continent. The legacy is not one of disappearance, but of transformation into new forms of financial and intellectual influence. The legacy of the Oppenheimer dynasty remains deeply contested. To their defenders, they were visionary entrepreneurs. They built world-class companies, created jobs, and contributed significantly to South Africa's economic development. They are portrayed as nation builders. To their critics, however, they were arch-capitalists who amassed enormous fortunes by exploiting South Africa's mineral wealth and its people. They're seen as key beneficiaries and, at times, enablers of an unjust and brutal apartheid system. There is no easy reconciliation of these views. The story of the Oppenheimers remains profoundly relevant today. It raises enduring questions about the nature of wealth and power. It forces a confrontation with issues of corporate responsibility and historical accountability. In a South Africa still grappling with extreme inequality and the long shadows of apartheid, the Oppenheimer saga serves as a potent case study. It explores the intricate, often uncomfortable links between big business, political power, and ethical considerations. The empire may have changed its form, but its impact and the questions it raises continue to resonate.